Hey, it's Samantha Hartley of the Profitable Joyful Consulting Podcast. This season, we're talking about management consulting. And today I wanted to talk about trust and building trusting relationships with your clients. I had someone ask me on a webinar whether they should take their clients to lunch or to like a ball game or something. And I love that question because I think what it's really asking is, how do I build trust with my clients? How do I create personal relationships which can improve the results of the work? And that's a great question because I think it's not obvious, right? Like, how do you make friends with people? Like, who knows? So I have some specific ideas about how to build trust and where in the process we need to do this. It may seem early, but even before you're working with someone, if you've ever been on a discovery call where you're asking questions and you feel like these are kind of personal questions, or the person is responding as if it's kind of either embarrassing or they have a little shame around their situation, then that's an example of a time when you really want to have trust. When people reach out to us to solve a problem or to make a change or do anything new, very often the current situation can involve them feeling embarrassed about how things are or why they haven't already done it or anything else. So embarrassment and shame, I think, are really common when someone is saying, I need your help. And it's a big deal to say, I need your help or I need anyone's help. And to me, this is why I consider sales calls to be kind of sacred. You know, you're sharing this intimate space with someone, revealing things that they may never have told anyone ever before. So that's definitely a place where you want to have trust. Before you're even saying you should work with me, this is the part where you're just discerning whether they might be a fit for you or not. So we have to have trust that early in this process. I've had a lot of situations where a potential client will bail on someone before, like at the 11th hour, right before they were about to say yes. And sometimes you can trace that all the way back to the beginning of the selling process, right when people first met, and they didn't establish the kind of trust then that was necessary for that person to make the leap so many steps later. So let's just think back, right, when you're in those first conversations and you're asking intimate questions such as, how much money are you earning? Or how did the embezzlement happen? Or why do you think the people are leaving your firm and quitting to go work somewhere else? Like, before we ask those kinds of questions, we really need to establish trust. And so how do we do that? Well, the first thing I would look at is the quality of your energy. How are you being when you are asking these questions? So one of the ways, I think, is to be calm and centered so that it feels like someone can lean up against you and there's something there, like you're supportive, even physically, but energetically, right? So feeling grounded and supportive and confident and especially compassionate. Like, we should keep in mind that this conversation for them could be uncomfortable, and being curious about the information that they're sharing with us. So I think if you are conscious of how you are being energetically, then you're going to get better results. And it's interesting because you won't just get them in a Zoom call or in person when someone can actually see you and feel your energy. You'll also get that on phone calls and even something abstract like LinkedIn Messenger. If you bring the right energy to a messenger conversation, it's going to affect the language that you use in that, and that's going to affect your results. So first, look at your energy. The second thing that I want you to do, and this is moving more from kind of the intangible to like the logical. During the course of your conversations, share your case studies and success stories so that someone is feeling like you have dealt with these problems and challenges before and you've gotten results. You've helped other people just like them to solve those problems. And when people hear that, they hear that you're someone who is familiar with these problems and is able to solve them, then they're going to trust you more. It's often said in marketing that if you can clearly articulate someone's problem, they kind of assume that you can actually solve it as well. And so that's kind of what's happening in this situation. So the second thing is that definitely bringing those case studies and sharing those stories of who you've helped before. The third thing that I really love to use is permission, asking people for permission to take the next step deeper in this conversation. So I might ask, before I ask about their revenues, well, would you mind if we look at the numbers together? Or is it okay if I talk to you about why the people might have been leaving your company? Or would it be okay if we talked about the embezzlement in a little more detail? Do you mind if I ask you some questions about that? So when we ask for permission, I think a few things happen. The first thing is that we acknowledge that this might be an area of sensitivity for them. And so before we go there, is it okay with them? The second thing that happens is they allow they allow that, or they don't allow it. And that in itself will help you to gauge where you are in the trust process. So if people say, actually, no, I'm really not ready to get into that, I'd rather talk about something else, then you know where you stand. So permission is super great for that. And I love to use it in these kinds of situations. And lastly, I love to acknowledge and affirm. So if someone is sharing something with you which is difficult, it's really good for you to let them know that you noticed that. You saw that they were doing a difficult thing, or really any other emotion that you feel is important to acknowledge. So especially in this situation, if they've been sharing, then I might acknowledge, thank you for sharing the details of this embezzlement with me. I understand that it's been really embarrassing and difficult for you as a company to go through, and for you personally. And I understand that. I think it would be that way for anyone in the situation. So acknowledging, noticing that, affirming their feelings, they're not wrong to feel that way, and they're probably not alone. Those kinds of things can go a really long way to creating that sense that you understand them, and understanding them is a long way towards trust. So all of that is the relationship I would create before we're even saying I might work with you. This is just to be able to have meaningful conversations about their situation. You can see that if you establish that kind of trust that early, then the whole selling process will go more smoothly. The second place that I want you to think about trust is when you're working with people in the company. Your point people, whoever brings you in, and the people who are going to be working with you, they're doing many things that require they trust you. So first of all, this whole wacky idea, like, we hired you, is this really going to work? It's going to be important for you to be right by their side this whole time. They've taken a huge risk by bringing you in within their organization. That the people who they may have taken that risk in front of may be spouses or partners. So they've had to sell in that idea to other people. So it's really important that you, again, are aware of that, acknowledge that, and then are there to support them in following through with the idea that they took a risk on, they took a leap to do. That's really going to help you to ensure that those results are in place. Without trust, and with people beginning to, if doubt starts to seep into the organization and people start to doubt it and to kind of talk negatively about the work, then you're going to be in trouble. So this is really getting out in front of that problem. So once again, how do we establish trust? Or in this case, if you've been doing it so far, how do you maintain that high trust level? And possibly if you've got not just your point of contact, but now you've got new people in the organization who need to trust you. So I think the number one way for you to create and deepen trust in yourself when you're working with clients is to keep your word. Keep your word. You committed to things before this happened. You promised that certain things were going to happen. You outlined a process that was going to go into place. So as you're implementing, I want you to reflect back to them. Remember, I said this is us doing this. So for example, hey, we just had a kickoff meeting. That went great. Everybody's super excited. They've got their to-do list and they're in action. That's just as I had explained was going to happen, right? So you're reminding them of the thing that you said, and now it's happening. You'll really want to do this in the hard slog phase. Wow. I know that there's a lot of, people coming forward and they're experiencing a little conflict because we're doing things in a new way. Remember before we started, I talked to you about that there would be a hard slog phase of this when we'd really kind of get into the nitty gritty of the work. Well, that's this. This is exactly what I mentioned would happen. So you, saying the thing that you had promised before, like whether they like it or not, in this case, they might not be happy with how it's going, but because it's hard, but at least you had warned them about that. And that does build trust. It says you've been here before, and it says, hey, I warned you. So I think those are really important, as well as things like saying, remember I told you before we started that I would always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. Well, today's one of those days. And what I got to say to you is, so that kind of thing, whether it's a positive thing of like, hey, I said this was going to be great, or, a more difficult thing, keeping your word is really important. Another way that you can build even more trust is to empower people with your authority. When you come in from outside the company, you have, they hired you, they believe in you, and you have a certain kind of authority. And so you can confer that onto and kind of deputize people in the organization with your authority and say, like, I'm going to be working with Jane and she's going to be my point person. And, she's amazing at these kinds of things. When you build them up, they not only does that individual trust and believe and appreciate you more, but the people around them are like, oh, well, the expert said that Jane is really good at so and so. So, all right, well, that'll be good. And use your authority and expertise and gravitas as an outsider coming into this who's been trusted, who's been hired to come in and do this stuff, to share that authority with others in the organization. You'll be amazed at how like they take you seriously, and your ideas or your word, especially your affirmation of them, like if you give them compliments and things, that's important to them. They want to know that they're performing as you want them to. And I've seen this with bank presidents. Like if I gave them a compliment, they would be like set. They would be like, wow, we just did a marketing thing. Look at that. So they feel proud of themselves. So use that to stoke trust in themselves and in their own abilities. So during the work is where we might do those lunches and ball games. And I wanted to mention, we adapt to the culture of the place. So whatever is the way that we create relationships in this particular culture is kind of what you want to pay attention to. So that might be, gifts. It could be team bonding exercises. It could be, an offsite or things like that. And yes, it could be lunches and ball games. So kind of follow your heart and your brand, like what's on brand for you. But I just wanted to share how I do this in VIP days. When I work with my clients, business growth partners is what I call them. We work together for a year, at least a year. Some of them have been with me for many years. And one of the things that I always do is a VIP day. And that's a time that we get together and we just it's an offsite. We meet in a beautiful location. So New York, Baltimore, Newport, Rhode Island, New Orleans, Boston, Martha's Vineyard, where I live. How could I forget? So I bring them away from their business. And then we spend time that's dedicated to planning and working on their business. And many of the spectacular results that have come from my clients working with them happened, or kind of the seed of them was in the VIP day. So the kind of trust and bonding that happens in that is really key, which is why I support the idea of these, lunches, baseball games as a concept. The VIP day, you would think, is a time that we come together and we start at 8 and we go until 6 and we work in a conference room with a flip chart and we crank out the work. But that's not how trust is created. Not trust in me as their consultant and not trust in themselves. So how this actually looks is the night before we meet and we have a dinner together, and we almost never talk about the business. We almost always just talk about fun stuff because we're meeting often for the first time ever, and definitely in person. And so we're kind of getting to know each other. And so by the time we come together in the morning at 9 to start to work on the business, know each other and we feel comfortable and kind of we can dig in. So it's really shortcut a lot of things that need to happen. And that's the same thing that can happen with your clients, depending on what you choose. So you've shortcutted a lot of this kind of getting to know you time and trust building and learning about personalities. So we do a session in the morning. We break for lunch. Lunch, again, we usually talk a little bit about the work because it's top of mind for us, right? And then after lunch, do we go back and do a hard slog until the evening? No, we do not. We go for a walk and we might shop. We might go walk in a park. But this walking time after lunch and after our morning session is what I call integration. It's taking the ideas and the concepts that we've put out there and it's integrating them into ourselves. Now, after that, very often what happens is we go back for a short afternoon session where we kind of consolidate everything. We hone it down into an action plan, but we summarize whatever happened, and then we go. And that has been the key to building a $2 million business over and over again for my clients. Adding $600,000 in one single year, doubling practically a $750,000 business. Those kinds of results get moving a business over the course of 3 years into stratospheric success. It began in those days. So I'm sharing that example because there's something kind of magical. It's hard to describe, like alchemical, like specifically what did happen in those days. That's the thing that you're looking for, I think, in these trust building ball games and gifts is what do I need to do to create that kind of a relationship? So as I've said, think about your brand, who you are, think about your love language, think about the client's love language, their culture. There's all of these kind of criteria that can come together. And I think you'll see a lot of times doing something in person and off-site can be really magical and help to create that heart-to-heart connection that you're looking for. The last place that I wanted to talk about client trust and relationships is well after the work is done. When you're done working with a client, if you have heard me talk about anything, I always say never burn your bridges. You always want to end on a good note. So even leaving my corporate background, which I was not very happy, I didn't burn those bridges because those were the relationships which led to all of the future work that came to me practically. If you look at your past clients, do you have a good enough relationship with them that you can go back to them and have conversations about anything, just catching up with them or doing new work? So I had a gal say, I didn't have those kind of relationships where I can go call someone and say, hey, let's just chat. So to be clear, what you're doing is I want you to maintain those good relationships so that when you choose to, you can go back to past clients and say, hey, I got something new going on. I'm sure you do too. Would you have 20 minutes to spend on the phone just catching up? If you have trusting relationships, they will almost always say yes to that. Now, an odd thing that happens, and I won't promise this will always happen, but it happens an unusually high amount of the time, is people say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just called. I was just thinking about you. Or, it's so funny that you called. So-and-so and I were just talking about you. So those calls can seem like you're taking advantage or creating serendipity, which is what they do. So having a new thing to talk about or an opportunity to reach out to a past client can often lead to new work, but it requires that you have the kind of relationship with them that if you contact them a few months or a few years down the line, they'll still take your call. So reaching back, we might reach back for new work, for referrals, for testimonials, or to capture a case study about the work that you did there. So that those trusting relationships are what's required for you to be able to do that at that phase, even long after the work. Okay. So that's a lot. What I want you to do is really turn inside and ask your heart, what's the good next steps for you on this? Because we've talked a lot about trust, and this isn't the kind of thing, I've given you actual specific techniques, but it's not the kind of thing that you're going to be able to kind of muscle and write action plans about. The best way for you to start with this is in your heart and say, like, what's my way in? And think about a single specific client, maybe one that you had a little trouble kind of like getting that rapport with. If you go into your heart and you think, like, what's really the way that I can connect better with her? That's going to give you a little bit of information into how is going to be your way to do this. Look at the difficult ones, like a good fit for you in a working relationship way, but like, we just kind of never really get beyond the work kind of thing. Just think about what's a good way for me to take that into a different kind of relationship. I know you can do it. I trust you can do it. So with that, I'm wishing you a profitable and joyful consulting business.
Thanks for listening to the Profitable Joyful Consulting podcast. If you like our show and want to know more, check out profitablejoyfulconsulting.com. And please leave us a review on iTunes.